Hello everyone and welcome to our fifth session in this year's Spring Feed Fact Fortnight, where we are shining a light on feeding our competition and performance horses. Tonight we're going for a different topic, and that is balancing the scales, a modern approach to weight management. And I'm delighted to welcome Kelly Hibbit from Weighed In, who offers a weighing service for horses, visiting yards and offering a range of services connecting with that. Kelly, thank you very much for joining me. Tell us a bit about you and how you got into this business.
Thanks, Claire, and it's a pleasure to join you on this lovely evening. So as you say, I'm Kelly. I'm the founder of Weighed In. I've been running now as a business for getting on for nearly 5 years. It was a COVID business where I decided, after having done 20 years in a non-equestrian job and keeping my own horses on the side, that I really would like to get back into the equestrian world, a bit more mainstream, and get out of the office and go and speak to people and help and support people with their horses. And Weighed In was born. It came off the back of some podcasts. I listen to quite a lot of podcasts whilst I'm driving, and it sort of linked into a lot of stuff that I've been listening to on the Equi Ratings podcast, if you're familiar with that, about monitoring performance and all the stats around that. And actually, it was a horse and hound podcast as well, with the veterinary sections on there. And I actually still remember exactly where I was near where I live when I was in my car, and I went, "That's my business model." And I had the best idea ever to set up a business during a lockdown period in COVID to go out and see people.
Well, the best ideas sometimes come out of unusual situations. So what is it you do? What's Weighed In about?
So Weighed In is a non-judgmental, independent support service for horse owners. I'm fully mobile, so I've got a mobile set of scales in the back of my car. Come out to yards, single horse owner as well as larger yards, to help you manage and monitor your horses with their weight and condition. I like to speak individually to each owner about the individual circumstances of each horse, try and understand what they're doing work-wise, any health conditions, what age they're at, look at their breeding, but also understand the environment that they're kept in, and alongside also the owner's other commitments, in terms of what do they do in life, and therefore look at how the management can support around basically fitting all those pieces together.
And I know some feed companies, when they go out and do feed advice, they take scales with you. How does what you do differ from what a feed company might come and do?
So I'm not a nutritionist. I'm always quite clear that I'm not there to be offering nutritional advice. I'm more of what I class myself as a knowledge exchange person. If you contact a feed company, they'll offer their massively important advice on the feeding and the nutrition side of your horse. My service then backs that up to say, is what you're doing with all of that working for the desired goals? I.e., is your horse losing weight if that's what the goal is? Is it staying where it is in what I call the Goldilocks space, where they're just right? Or is it actually that you've got a horse that actually needs to gain weight as well? So the modern part of my service, so from the title of this conversation of a modern approach, is I've actually got an online system that my company is invested in, where we log all of the data live as we take it. So each owner has their own account. They have their horses attached in their account. We log the data. We take a profile picture of the horse on that visit as well and upload that to the record. I don't do paper, so everybody gets an email on the day with their readings. But that is logged in the system against their record, and we add to that every time that we see them, so that we can look quite clearly at the data and start to make informed decisions about whether what we're doing management wise and feeding wise, is it working, or do we need to make some changes?
And how often typically would you see people? How often would you go out to do? I suppose it depends, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, that's probably one of the most common questions I get asked. So my personal approach is, if you are actively trying to weight manage and keep an eye on your horse, minimum of twice a year. Any longer than that, you start to get into the realms of the data's not really telling you too much because of the seasonal changes. But I've got a variety of people on mainly 6, 4 and 3 monthly.
Mm-hmm.
But I've then got people, I've got a few clients that are on much more frequently than that, because they are managing certain things, or they're keeping an eye on certain things. So I've got a couple of ladies that are on monthly with their ponies, because they've got real concerns with laminitis, particularly around this time of year. And then I've got some top professional competition yards as well, where we're actually monitoring around events and things like that. So for the competition horse, we're trying to understand what effect does the competition have on the horse, so that they can start making interventions pre, during and post competition, but also looking at what the optimum weight is for horses at a certain level, so that when they get round to perhaps getting into the next season, or if the horse has had a break at some point in the season and they're trying to get them back to a level, they know what they're aiming for, to say, yeah, this is part of our preparation plan.
Yeah, I think that's really valid, because I know Alan, who I was speaking to earlier this week, raised that, and I had never really thought about the impact that travel will have on a horse.
It really does.
Combined travel, competition, stress, return travel back home, how much that might actually impact on a horse's weight.
So I did some work a few years ago down at the Bicton Horse Trials, where they hold the grassroots long format 3-day event, and I went into that with my own ideas about what we were doing. But ultimately, the program that we put in place was to weigh horses upon arrival. We then weighed them pre and post the roads and tracks and cross country, and we weighed them before they left as well. The data that came out of that was hugely insightful. Every horse left heavier than it arrived, which was
Good
really
heavens.
interesting. And it's the travelling. I had one particular horse that had travelled 9 hours, and it gained over 50 kilos in 4 days.
Gosh.
So it really brought home how much energy they use whilst travelling. Even if they are good travellers, you're not taking them off the lorry covered in sweat. They've stood nicely, and even maybe motorway miles where they're not having to do a lot of round bends and things. It really does have an effect on them. And knowing that also means that you can make interventions. So as an example, with one of my own horses who doesn't travel very well, I went through an investigative period to say, how does travelling affect her? I would weigh, literally, I'd put the weighbridge out, I'd weigh her on the way out of the stables in the morning, go and do a competition, weigh her on the way back in. And I was seeing that she would come home between 25 and 30 kilos lighter than that she left. Doing grassroots level, this is not high level competition, it was around 80s and 90s. So but what it allowed me to do was make interventions pre-travelling and when we got to the competition. So I think it was Ellen Lincoln was speaking about this on one of the previous shows, making sure she had hydrated feed when we got there, for example, that we were replacing some of that hydration that she'd lost during travelling, and putting some of the energy back in that she'd actually used just basically staying upright. So the weighing part of it can really give insights into how your horse copes with the competition environment to help you keep them as ready as they can be when you actually get there.
It's really useful. And what other measurements, because we were talking about this before, what other measurements do you routinely take apart from weight? Because I think that's all part of the monitoring process.
It is, yeah. So I do what I call the horse's what, which is a term that I developed, which is weight, heart rate, and temperature. So we take resting heart rate and resting temperature on every visit as well for every horse, providing they'll let me near them. And we love that. And what we're looking for is, where does the horse sit as a normal? Because every horse has its own space, so that you can use it for baseline data for vets. So at home, if ever you think the horses are just a bit off colour, you've got something as a starting point to say, well, are those measurements off kilter where they would normally be? and it might be as a starting point that it's a decision, do we need to call the vet? But also you can use those readings when you get to competition. So understanding, particularly for the type of competition perhaps where you stable away, how does the horse cope within its stabling? Does it generally have a raised heart rate?
Mm.
How is its temperature going? Are they recovering, especially when it's warm? How are they coming back down to those restings? So you can really start to manage all of that within there. And obviously with the FEI regulations around temperature taking and all of that, it really helps feed into all of that side of it as well.
Yes, I can remember talking to Red Wings a couple of years ago when they were very much on their Strangles campaign. And the point they made is that by the time you've noticed you've got an elevated temperature, it's almost too late.
Yeah.
And so by the time they've developed those symptoms, so just being able to keep that monitoring and notice any variation should really help you nip something or identify a possible problem really, really early.
It really should. So there's quite broad ranges that we work to with that. So as a general principle, vets are usually fairly happy if a horse is showing a temperature anywhere between a 36.5 and a 38.5 degrees Celsius. I've got the majority of the horses I see actually sit somewhere within the 37s. But what that means is that if you suddenly start going above that, and you can spot it, you can start keeping an eye on them.
Yeah.
And again, with the heart rate, it's quite a broad range that we work to say, if we don't know any better, the horse is, if it's within its normal heart rate, but knowing where they would normally sit to know whether you're away from that point, again, can help inform whether you've got something going on. Try and maybe diagnose it that little bit sooner, help the horse onto recovery that little bit quicker, and help your stress levels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it typically, you've mentioned laminitis, I know you've mentioned performance horses, is the weighing more tended towards overweight horses, or do you find that the other end of the spectrum is also something that you see?
I see it all the way from the horses that are underweight, right the way up to the horses that are overweight. So weighing is for everybody, it's for every horse, because ultimately what we're looking for is for those that are one side of the ideal or the other is what do we do to get them into that ideal space, what I call the Goldilocks space, that it's just right. um, uh,
I'm afraid.
and it's also then about those ones that are in that space is keeping them there.
Yeah.
So I do see a variety, and I see a variety from I do sort of young horses as well. So we're monitoring their development. So as part of the service, every horse also gets a height measurement as part of the service. For adult horses, generally it's only one that we do on the first visit. But for the younger horses that are developing, it's vitally important that we're actually height measuring as part of the monitoring program, because if we suddenly get a huge jump in weight, we need to understand whether they've actually grown as well, because otherwise the human brain jumps to some horrible conclusions about what might be going on. So it's I see a variety: young, old, big, small, young, and then everything from the sort of the pet ponies who live in gardens right up to the top 5-star competition horses.
Because the other reason for monitoring weight with my SQP hat on is if you are having to administer an anthelmintic, a wormer, absolute key is knowing the weight of your horse to administer the right amount.
Yes.
Because one of the biggest threats that we face is anthelmintic resistance. And one of the things that can build up anthelmintic resistance is consistently underdosing. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of horses where they've said, guess the weight of this horse. And it's very rare that you can guess the weight of a horse.
It is. It's really interesting. So I try and operate a two-way dialogue with the owners rather than me just going and giving them information. It's sort of, okay, what are they actually seeing? What's their vision of what their horse is? And sort of it's really interesting, the perception that we all have. And in fact, I've had a couple over the weekend where even I was caught out. You know, I see obviously quite a lot of horses on a very regular basis, and they were on the scales, and I was like, if I was just to look at these and try and give a broad estimate based on my experience how heavy these horses are, I wouldn't put them at that weight. And therefore it's a refreshing reminder that actually we do need that technology to help us a little bit with those elements. But you're absolutely right, Claire. There's practical applications with the weighing as well. So worming is a huge one. I do have extensive conversations with my clients about that, always encouraging people to have a worm count done, have their worm count program in the first instance. But if and when you get to that point of administering a wormer, to be worming it to the correct dosage.
Yeah.
I've got quite a lot of people that are busy being weighed at the moment, or the horse is being weighed at the moment, so that because we are sort of in worming season. So that's quite a common one. But you've also got the practical tips with it as well. So again, going back to travelling, how heavy is your horse or horses that you're putting on your
Yes,
transport?
yeah.
It's vitally important, because the payload limits are on your transport for safety, and the
Mm.
legality of then that backs that up. We want our horses to stay safe, and we want to stay safe while we're on the roads with them. So it's a really useful thing to be able to know exactly what you put into your vehicles.
Mm.
I also do some work with, it's not just horses that we put on the bridge. So sometimes I will get people piling all of their stuff onto the bridge that they take out with them in the lorries.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it adds up. You know, you put your water tub in, you put your hay
Oh,
net in.
and if you take water, that weighs literally.
Well, 1 kilo per litre.
Yeah.
Your fuel, your granny, your picnic, your dog, you know, you pile it all on, and it soon adds up, and it's quite scary actually how
Mm.
much I piled all my stuff onto it, all my air jackets and all that kind of stuff, and it really does all add up. So we do that as well. There's also practical elements with it, with if you are weighing your feed or administering any other kind of medication or supplement feeding. And as well then, in terms of actually the management side of things, is feeding your horse, in some cases, rationed amounts of forage,
Mm.
if that's the route that you need to go down, and working that out to the actual weight of your horse allows you to then know, are you giving them the correct amount rather than guessing,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
you are. So, and part of the monitoring with that is looking at whether that routine has worked,
Mm.
and then actually calibrating those figures back in with each other. That if, for example, if you've been working to get them to lose weight and they've hit your target, then you need to think about, well, we need to adjust those levels of how
Mm.
much we're feeding in
Mm.
order to either keep going if that's what you're after, or level it off to make sure they're then staying where they need to be.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely key. And so just describe what would somebody expect from a visit from you? How readily do the horses get on the weighing scales? Because I've
Oh,
seen them, so I know the
yeah.
variation of types there are. But yeah, what
Yeah.
if somebody asked you out for the first time, what would they expect?
So the first thing I would do is have a good chat with them to start with. I'd talk them through the process, make sure that everybody's comfortable with what we're expecting to do. The primary thing that I need with the scales is somewhere relatively hard and relatively level.
Mhm.
It's actually the hardness of the surface that is the most important, so that the scales don't sink into it, because
Mhm.
otherwise they're not giving an accurate. But it doesn't have to be concrete. It could be a stone yard or anything like that. Um, but I can't do it basically in a field that's although that's not the case at the moment, that's knee deep in water, because it doesn't
Yeah,
work from that
yeah,
perspective.
it's too dry.
Um, well, exactly. I could probably put it on a field at the moment, actually. Um, so my scales are, because they are mobile, so they're modular, so they come apart in 3 pieces. So we put them
Right.
together.
Mhm.
They don't have any kind of barriers or sides on them, and
Mhm.
mine have got the black rubber on them. So they actually, a lot of people sort of say, "Oh, the horse thinks that it's like getting on the trailer." Um, so the key thing I find with every visit that I go to is being quiet and being patient. Some
Mhm.
horses climb straight on, no problem. They're like old pros at it. It's all fine. Some take a little bit longer to try and understand what we're asking them to do, try and find their balance on it, because certainly for the bigger horses, it's not the biggest platform for them to
Mhm.
stand on. And we just have to allow them to figure it out. Maybe sometimes it can take a few minutes and a few goes before they've managed to work out that they need to put all 4 feet on and that it's not going to bite them. And it's just patience, and allowing the horse to work out what we're asking.
Mhm.
Interestingly, the most excitement is caused by the height stick.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised actually. We've done that
Yeah.
ourselves.
But I think in the whole time I've been doing this, I've weighed over 4,000 horses,
Oh,
that are on my books, and I've only had one that wouldn't get on the bridge.
gosh, that's
Yeah.
really good.
Mm.
And that's 4,000 and how many years did you set this up in? 2020 or
It was
21?
very end of 2020 that I started, but I didn't really get going until the beginning of 2021.
Yeah.
And I do also share this with a non-horsey office job as well. I
Mhm.
mix and match it a little bit, so I'm not out weighing every day of the week, but the days I am weighing, quite busy at the moment.
Imagine. And where are
Um,
you based? Do you cover the whole country? Do you cover the whole country or?
Not quite. So I'm quite fortunate that I'm based right in the heart of the country. I'm right in the middle of the Midlands.
Oh,
I'm sort
really
of
good.
right in the golden triangle of the motorway network. I cover around 100-mile radius, but I literally can go north, east, south, and west from where
Yeah.
I am. So at the moment, at the weekend, I was up near York. And did that up there. I go right across to the edges of Cheshire. I've branched out into the boundaries of Wales. I sort of draw the line at the M4 going down south.
Yeah, I
Go past
understand.
the
Yeah.
M4, it's getting a bit too far to come home. And right across into Norfolk and sort of on the boundaries almost of the M25 in some cases as well. So it's a giant big circle in the middle.
Mm.
Yeah, get to see some very beautiful countryside while I'm out and about.
Yeah, I bet. And what sort of have you come across anything unexpected that you've maybe not been expecting?
The travelling insight was a little bit unexpected. I knew that it
Mm.
had an effect, but I didn't really appreciate how much. And I've been, I've had horses. I was very, very lucky that I got my first pony at 4 years old. I come from a horsey background. I have been owning, managing, and competing horses my entire life. I still have. I've still got my own horses that I do things with. I've done a lot of traveling with them, and I didn't really appreciate actually how much it took out of them.
Mm.
The other little story that always sticks in my mind is one about the realization of what weight on a horse can do to other parts of their musculoskeletal system.
Mhm.
And it's one particular horse that was overweight, was in regular work, but different things up until the point I started seeing them hadn't really been working. Once we started monitoring them and adjusting the management a little bit and keeping a little bit of a tighter rein on that, the owner really started to see some improvements. And she's now got her into a really, really good place and managing to keep her there. And the really interesting thing about it was she said, my farrier the other day noted how her shoes aren't worn like they used to be.
Oh goodness.
And I said, that's really interesting. It really shows. So the shoeing cycle hadn't changed, the workload hadn't changed, and the surfaces that she was riding on, but the horse wasn't wearing its shoes down as much because
Mm.
there wasn't so much weight going down those legs and onto those feet.
Yeah, that's
So the farrier is no longer able to shave with the shoes when he's taken them off.
it's really interesting, and it's not something you'd automatically think
Mm,
of. And
no.
I know sometimes I've got one of mine is a Percheron, and so she's a big
Mm,
lass, and I can remember a nutritionist saying she may look fine, but you must try and keep weight off her because the bones, her very bones are heavy, and
yeah.
so any extra weight that you get on her, she'll feel it and it will go down through her feet. So
Mm.
that's similar. It's really important to keep that monitoring, and not just perhaps for the obvious reasons.
Absolutely. So I think, keeping it's vital as it is for humans that we're at a healthy weight, particularly for those horses that are competing. We're asking them to do quite a big job for us and carry us around on their backs with whatever it is that we're asking them to do. And they've got to support themselves as well. And every horse is, and I hope I don't offend anybody with what I'm about to say, is essentially every horse is what I describe as a potato on matchstick legs. They're
Mm,
quite a big mass, even if they're in really good shape. They're quite a big mass on quite thin structures that go down to even thinner structures on their feet that are supporting all of that.
mm,
It is like us when we're on high heels. I can't cope very well when I'm on high heels. I'm crippled by, after a couple of hours. Um, so it's really important to be thinking about all of the weight that is going down those structures.
mm,
If you then think about the weight that goes down those structures, if we're jumping onto the front
mm.
feet particularly, bearing in mind that the front end is also heavier because it's got the neck and the head. The faster you go, the higher you jump, the more those pressures increase. So keeping the weight off and keeping them an appropriate weight for that level of competition is absolutely vital to try and help keep your horse both comfortable and sound.
Yeah.
Um, if you've got a horse that perhaps has other issues, I do see quite a lot that sometimes have arthritic changes in things like their hocks and things like that. Trying to keep any excess weight off those types of things again really helps their mobility. So it's sort of thinking about all of those aspects as
Mm,
well. You've obviously got horses that have got other medical issues such as the EMS and the laminitis and anything like that. Another interesting point that I've come across is I do see a few horses that have been diagnosed with asthma.
mhm,
And by seeing those at different times of year, and sometimes during the summer when the asthma is perhaps a little bit more worse than it might be during the winter, we do see things like an increased heart rate.
mm,
Um, I have got evidence to show that if I've seen them after they've just had their flu jabs, they've got an increased temperature, and
mm.
it's linking all those bits together as well, and just having that insight and really thinking about the way that some of these things affect our horses that can just help us make informed decisions on what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's really key is knowledge is power,
Mm,
and understanding that is going to benefit the horse's entire welfare and the way we
mhm,
keep them. So, just to close out, what would you say are your 3 top tips when it comes to managing weight?
mm. So the first tip really is knowing what you're starting with, and that is around the weighing and the condition assessment. The two things do go together.
Mm,
You need to have some mechanism of being able to actually to measure that. Top thing for weight management, particularly for the horses that you're trying to get weight off or maintain a weight, is movement.
mhm,
I term it movement rather than exercise. Whilst exercise does massively help, of course, it is about the movement. So you'll be aware perhaps that the track systems have become very, very popular in
mm,
recent years. I was a little bit hesitant when that's really first started coming
mm,
into the public domain. I was sort of, oh, here's another horsey fad that everybody's jumping on. And actually, I've eaten my words. The more people I've got that go onto those types of systems, they really, really do work. I know that they're not practical for everybody. Whether that's through a space, if you're on a livery yard, you might not be able to put infrastructure like that in. Cost is a big one. So I encourage people to think about anything what I call a paddock movement system. Where is it just a line of electric fence that goes up your paddock with a gap at the top? Where if they need a drink, they've got to walk all the way around it. Every step
very good
counts.
idea.
You know, anything. I've got people doing a variety. I'm like, think outside the box. I've got people doing like the queuing systems and all sorts, and it really, really does work. So don't think that you can't necessarily put a whole big track in. Whilst they are fantastic, there are things that we can do that
Mhm,
encourage that movement. The other one, and again, this is for horses that perhaps are struggling with being overweight, is soaking hay. I can
mhm,
absolutely tell you that yes, I've got evidence to show that it does work. It's a horrible job to do, especially
mhm,
during the winter, but soaking the hay does really work for a bit of calorie control. And for me, it does allow you to remove that level of calories, but then maybe up the volume of the fibre that you're allowing the horse to eat,
mm,
which is really important. I'll let your nutritionist cover this, but I would just caveat that to say that if you are soaking your hay, make sure that you are replacing the vitamins and minerals that are being lost through that process with a supplement to make sure that the horses are getting that.
mm,
And the other big one really is, and this has sort of, I suppose, surprised me a little bit with weight and again, this is for the overweight horse more than anything, is muzzles. They are a bit of a contentious topic. A few years ago, again, it was one that I was like, oh, I'd never put a muzzle on my horse. I'd just rather keep it in. I've completely changed my attitude to that. I would much rather now see a horse with a muzzle on, out in the field, enjoying this glorious sunshine and getting some vitamin D on their back, especially after such a dull winter and a dull 18 months, really, hasn't it? Out with their friends, perhaps, so that they're getting their socialisation and moving around rather than being stuck in their stables.
And you say on that last point, because last week in Horse and Hound, there was a feature on grazing muzzles, the pros and the cons, and having used them, I'm a bit like you. I'm a definite pro, because it enables a horse to have I think, a better quality of life. And it's all about managing that and ensuring they fit. So yeah, I think that's a really good one. I think everything we do is all about doing the best for the horse, and we have a responsibility to do that. And sometimes you've got to make tough changes, tough decisions that you might not like, but actually it's the best for the horse.
Absolutely. And I have quite extensive conversations with people about this to try and understand what their viewpoints are, discuss what the pros and cons are. I find it absolutely vitally important that we enter a dialogue with people rather than just trying to tell them what they should do. And it's interesting then to see the results that come out of that. And that's the thing I really, really enjoy about my job, is when we really start to see the results that we're after. I mean, I get really emotional sometimes. I'm like crying with some of my customers when they've been trying so hard, and it's felt at moments like they're literally trying to push up water up a mountain. And actually, they start seeing the results that I feel like I've contributed a little bit to that. It's really emotional. But ultimately, what we need to be doing with our horses as weight management is, and I'm going to steal a phrase actually from the equi ratings, which is where, as you know, this all started, is what we call it's measure, monitor, and manage. So you're measuring what you've got in front of you, you're monitoring what's going on with it, and that allows you to then manage it accordingly and make changes or interventions where needed in order to get the results that you'd like.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And I think it's also giving that education to people to understand the tools they have at their disposal. Kelly, thank you so much. If somebody wants us to reach out to you, what's your website?
It's weighed-in, all one word, .co.uk. I've also got a Facebook and an Instagram presence. I'm more versed on Facebook than Instagram, I have to confess. I'm a bit old in that respect. Facebook was the first social media that came online. And my phone number and everything is on there as well, and email and what have you. So there's lots of different ways people can get in touch. Don't be put off if you're a single horse owner. I do come out to single horse owners, and do, in terms of the geographical area coverage, if you're not sure, just drop me a message. If you're not in my coverage area, I'll obviously let you know. But there are other weight management specialists around that I might be able to point you in the direction of, depending on whereabouts you are.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you ever so much, Kelly. I think it's been really fascinating to hear a real specialist in weight and the monitoring of weight. It's not somebody we've ever had. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And
thank you.
Look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.